Hi there. I wanted to get on here and make a quick video about Jupiter re-entering Capricorn. Jupiter re-entered Capricorn today. And I know it sounds confusing. What do you mean by Jupiter re-entering Capricorn, right? So let me show it to you. Let me share my screen and show it to you what I exactly mean. So if you see the chart down here, this is a sign of Capricorn. This is today. And this is a sign of Aquarius. I'm going to go a couple of weeks back. So you can see that Jupiter was in the sign of Aquarius. The R next to Jupiter means it's retrograde. From our position on Earth, we are here, Earth is in the center, and this is the sky around the Earth that we are looking at. So from our position on Earth, Jupiter is traveling retrograde or backwards, right? So let me step forward a few weeks and you can see it. You can see how Jupiter is going retrograde in the sign of in the sign of Aquarius. And then today it entered the sign of Capricorn. And I've made a quick video, a document when Jupiter was entering Capricorn back next year. And I'm going to share some parts of the document again. So as you can see, Jupiter has been in the sign of Capricorn since November of 2020. And will finally completely leave the sign of Capricorn on November of this year. What I mean is between last year November and this year November, Jupiter has gone from the sign of Capricorn into Aquarius. It entered Aquarius April of this year and then went retrograde. So it started traveling backwards from our vantage point on Earth. Jupiter doesn't really travel backwards in the sky, right? So started traveling backwards sometime in June. And then today it re-entered Capricorn and it's going to soon turn direct. It's going to soon turn direct in the sign of Capricorn and then start moving forwards and then move into Aquarius by the end of November this year. So we can see it here. Today, Jupiter entered Capricorn. And if I step this forward, in about a month's time, Jupiter is going to turn direct and then start moving forwards and then finally move into the sign of Aquarius. And it's going to stay there for about a year. We can also notice, and I'm going to come to the significance of this whole transit. We can also notice, I hope those with a little scientific bend can notice that as Jupiter is entering Capricorn and it's also preparing to go direct, it is slowing down slightly every week. So here it has covered about 0.93 degrees, here about 0.9 degrees, and then it starts to slow down 0.8 degrees, 0.7 degrees. And then by the time we are in October, it's only traveling in the reverse direction about 0.2, 0.1. This is almost nothing, right? The previous week it was 28.13 and this is 28.10. So in a week before it is going to turn direct, it's traveled only 0.03 degrees in the sky. And then it goes stationary. This is almost stationary and then direct, right? And then it starts to pick up speed as it starts to move forward. So this is what we mean when we say retrograde motion in the sky and from our vantage point on Earth, right? And this retrograde motion is actually important because Jupiter has been in the sign of Capricorn, has gone over Capricorn into Aquarius, and then now it's coming back into Capricorn to actually make sure that we really learned the lessons that we were supposed to learn. So what are the lessons that we were supposed to learn, right? When Jupiter traveled to Capricorn, and what is it trying to teach us while it is in Capricorn? So Capricorn, the Sanskrit or the Indian language is called Capricorn Makara, which means crocodile. So Makara is, or a crocodile can be on the land as well as in the water. So it has 4 legs as to walk on the land, and it also has a tail. And so when it travels on land, it's slow. It has stout legs. It doesn't have legs like a horse, right? That it can't run. It's very slow and methodical on earth, on the land. But when it's in water, it's pretty mighty. Its tail is really powerful. So it shows the structured nature of Capricorn on earth, right? On land, where it needs to be methodical and walk slow and follow the structures of the world. So Capricorn is a tamasic or a heavy. When I say tamasic, it really means it has a heaviness to it. It has a darker, heavy energy associated with it. Not that it is good or bad. Everything is good or everything is bad, right? So Capricorn is ruled by Saturn. It has a tamasic earthy energy, and it's 4-footed in the beginning, right? The front portion of the body is 4-footed, but then it's without feet at the end. So it shows the importance of having slow step-by-step process in our life towards anything, mainly towards materialistic things, because Capricorn is an earthy sign, so it relates to materialistic stuff. But once you have done your structured, methodical duties, you have put your routines in place, you have cleaned your habits, especially when it relates to money and finances or the food you put in your mouth, then it urges you to let go of the results, right? Because that let go and surrender is where in the mystical waters, the energy of Capricorn, that slow methodical energy, is transformed. But you can't skip that step of doing the step-by-step work that is required to make this life work. You have to do that first. You have to build structures. You have to get your business in order, so to say, before you let go and you surrender. You can't just bypass to surrendering. So that's the lesson of Capricorn. And so it's the spiritual lesson of Capricorn is like finding security and peace, which is really silence, right? But silence is associated with Capricorn, and we'll go over the nakshatras that are in the background of this zodiac, that form the zodiac. So it's finding security and silence within, rather than in the external materialistic world. You have to take care of the external materialistic world, but then the silence or the peace or the connection to God comes from within. It's also, the sign of the householder. And in Indian philosophies, the spiritual path of a householder, or the one who holds a family down yet seeks spirituality, is considered to be one of the highest spiritual paths for a particular reason. And you can see the reason in the spiritual lesson of Capricorn. And so internalizing the awareness of limitation of time, relationships, resources, and death for inner awakening rather than external material pursuit, manipulation, and control of resources, which is people, and holding wealth to feel secure, right? So instead of, we all are aware of the limited time we all have, right? And we are all aware of the limited resources we have. the Western societies think of limited time and limited resources as a trigger or as a stimulus to hoard more, to go after material successes, because you live only once, so let's experience it all. Whereas the Eastern societies or Eastern cultures um, use the same limited time, limited resources to know that because we have only so much in this life, how do we manage external resources just enough so we can go within and connect to God? That's also a Saturn lesson. Saturn makes you really aware of death, time, and all your limitations. But you're a limitless being in this limited body. And how do you experience your limitlessness through this limited body is that lesson of Capricorn. Jupiter, on the other hand, is called Guru. You know, Jupiter is the guru of the gods or of the deities. And you know, Jupiter is large, it's heavy, and it moves from its evolutionary process is from excessive material growth and attachment, which is the tamasic nature, and that's what is seen in the sign of Capricorn, to an over reliance upon man-made worldly philosophies. Like Jupiter can be very philosophical and be caught up in this Rajasic realm where it is just constantly debating on philosophies and trying to go from philosophy to philosophy, to a mind filled with the highest universal wisdom, that wisdom of the divine, right? Which cannot be explained in words, but it's an inner knowing. That's the evolutionary process of Jupiter. Jupiter evolves through this process in our life. So, you know, the qualities that are associated with Jupiter are faith, knowledge, expansion, children, education, spirituality, teachers, teachings, optimism, hope, wealth, orthodox beliefs, but also like mystical beliefs, right? So beliefs, whether they are orthodox or mystical in nature. Jupiter is actually exalted in Cancer, so it's exalted directly opposite Capricorn in the sign of Cancer, where, you know, the mystical, abstract, or universal qualities of Jupiter are expressed through this pure emotion of that water that Cancer provides. So Jupiter is naturally exalted there. In the sign directly opposite Cancer, which is Capricorn, which is where Jupiter is right now and is going to be there for next 5 to 6 weeks, or even more, about 8 weeks, Jupiter is considered to be debilitated. And the tamasic nature of Jupiter, because Capricorn is a tamasic sign, the tamasic nature of Jupiter is what is highlighted. So its expansive nature kind of gets bogged down by material pursuits, right? In Capricorn, instead of being hopeful and optimistic, it's harder to be hopeful. So one is driven by fear, insecurity, and trying to preserve life, right? You want to, like, you're in a survival mode, so to say, which all that interrupts with that mystical, expansive nature of Jupiter. And then it can also be in Capricorn, because Capricorn is very structured. The earlier part of Capricorn is very structured. It can also lead to orthodox belief systems, because if you think about orthodox religions, they are organized, they are structured, they have a particular set of rules, regulations, rituals that you need, and laws that you need to operate with, right? Generally, when Jupiter is in Capricorn, it's harder to feel connected to your teachers, so it can bring about disappointment in teachers. But those disappointments are your own, sometimes internal projections that are projected onto an external teacher. And it can also lead to like a rigid atheism, because everything in Capricorn is rigid. There's no fluidity till you consciously surrender, right? So in Capricorn, Jupiter can help you accumulate wealth, but it's accumulating wealth through penny pinching, through trying to save instead of trying to take risks or trying to just expand and take a leap of faith. And you can see that in our current scenario with the after effects of all the economic policies that were put into place for the pandemic, for COVID-19, right? And while Jupiter is in Capricorn, we'll go and revisit most likely those economic policies. The eviction moratorium is going to come to an end. Unemployment benefits are speculated to come to an end. So going and revisiting the after effects of all these policies that were put in place and how they're going to affect us in the long term, right? And can we rectify that? Or is there anything to be rectified? All those things will be a big theme while Jupiter is in Capricorn. Jupiter was also in Capricorn during the 2008, after the 2008 market crash, where people were climbing out of this the economic hit that they took. People's 401ks got wiped out, and a lot of people lost their homes. And while Jupiter was transiting through Capricorn, people started to figure out how do they come out of this big mess, right? Jupiter was also in Capricorn in 1985, where people were feeling the after effects of Reagan's trickle-down economics. It was called Reaganomics, right? So expect something like that. Expect people trying to figure out how they are going to manage their finances and their day-to-day living and their job or unemployment or their paychecks while Jupiter is going through Capricorn. And we're going to start seeing the after effects of all these different policies that were put in place during the pandemic or to combat the pandemic. I would also expect, while Jupiter is going retrograde and slowing down in Capricorn, we are going to be a little bit more introspective, individually and also collectively, to try and figure out what worked and what didn't work in terms of us managing our own material life. Many people just relied on their unemployment check and probably did not even look for jobs because that unemployment check was good enough for them to tide over difficult times. But how sustainable is that? Businesses that are paying double or triple just to get somebody to work, how are they going to recalibrate? Because they're already existing employees who worked through the pandemic were not getting paid as much as they're willing to pay new employees to just come and work, right? So you probably will see a recalibration of people trying to get through everything that happened during the pandemic. And maybe there will be a slow climb out of all the after effects, right? Trying to figure out how do you manage your financial systems and the inflation, the gas prices, all of that. So I think most people will adapt to saving and penny pinching versus over expenditure because things have gotten so expensive. And this is while Jupiter is in Capricorn. When it goes into Aquarius, it's a different sign, different story. altogether. And also, not all of it is that bad, right? Because Jupiter uh, rules cruel houses for Venus ruled signs. So, Venus ascendant, uh, Venus ruled ascendants are Taurus and Libra, Saturn ruled ascendants are Capricorn and Aquarius, and Jupiter rules cruel houses for them. So, when Jupiter is naturally, Jupiter is functionally malefic or functionally difficult for certain ascendants. When it's debilitated, it helps us, be a little bit more cautious about those things, and, helps us when things are difficult. It's better to double check or think twice before you act. So, for certain ascendants, it's not all that bad, even though Jupiter is in the sign of Capricorn and it's considered debilitated there for a particular reason that I explained. It's mostly going to be in the nakshatra of Dhanishta, and we can see here it's not going to go over Uttarashada and Shravana. So these three nakshatras are what forms the sign of Capricorn. And Jupiter goes into Dhanishta, turns direct, and then will move through Dhanishta into the next nakshatra. So Dhanishta is actually ruled by the 8 vasus. And the 8 vasus, you can think about it as the 5 elements and the 3 gunas. They're also widely referred to in Mahabharata, and Bhishma Pitama or Bhishma was one of the 8 vasus. And the 8 vasus are these beings or forces of nature that really vacillate between material world and spiritual world. And so they really titillate us, right? They really make us think about our life on earth versus our spiritual life. And that's one of the biggest lessons of Jupiter going back into Dhanishta. Dhanishta is also considered the wealthy one. You can be wealthy in worldly terms, but you can also be spiritually wealthy. And it's not an either or case. The lesson is, how do you be both? How can you be both materially wealthy and also spiritually wealthy? That's the whole Krishna Sudama story, right? Krishna is an avatar of Vishnu and is an enlightened being, but lives a materially rich life. He's a king maker. He lives in palaces, but he's not divorced from his own divine nature, right? And that's what we are learning in Capricorn. So the spiritual lesson of Jupiter in Capricorn is that the external world or man-made philosophies, all of those will eventually disappoint us and will actually fall short of the eternal wisdom where there is true bliss, right? Most of us live, when we talk about religion and spirituality, we are all in the man-made philosophies. We are trying to understand spirituality through words that somebody else has spoken. But true connection to divine cannot even be articulated in words. It's just an inner knowing. It's each one's journey is so special and so unique. And we have to remember that. So Jupiter in Capricorn urges us to find hope within ourselves and connect to a deeper silence, which is within ourselves, while we are amongst an external chaos. And you can see the chaos that the pandemic has caused and has ripple effects. And people are debating all kinds of philosophies. And it's just a war of philosophies. But while this external chaos is going on, there is this opportunity to connect to the divine from within, to go within and connect to that silence within you. and understand that the external noise is just noise, right? That's the offering that Jupiter in Capricorn has. And we can see that through, a few different examples. Arjuna, he gained his enlightenment and he saw Vishnu, his Vishwaroop, in a battlefield where people were dying, and he was tasked to kill his own cousins and his own brothers, teachers and elders of the family. In that chaos, in that subliminal space between death and life, where he was himself killing people, he found enlightenment. Think about that. Isn't that something very curious? He was not sitting in the Himalayas in a cave. That's not when he had his aha moment. That's not when God himself, gave him darshan. It was in a battlefield. Same with Bhishma. He in the war of Mahabharata, he lay on a bed of arrows. He was given the boon that and Bhishma is one of the 8 vasus, and Bhishma was given the boon that he could leave his body at his own will. So he lay on a bed of arrows, and that's when he gains his enlightenment on his deathbed, and his deathbed was made of arrows. It wasn't made of flowers. People were not at his feet. He was not sitting in a saffron or a white clad cloth in some hall, and devotees were not at his feet. He gained his enlightenment on a bed of arrows. Think about that. There's another story from Puranas about Gajendra Moksha, right? Gajendra is an elephant, and you can think about Gajendra as the elephant as Jupiter. And Gajendra was happily going about his way and drinking water from a river when a crocodile, which is Makara, Capricorn, think about that, when a crocodile comes and clenches his feet, and Gajendra is in pain, about to die. And he struggles and he struggles and he struggles to free his feet from this crocodile's mouth. So Jupiter in Capricorn struggling. And finally, Gajendra surrenders to Vishnu and calls on to Vishnu. And in that moment of complete surrender is when Vishnu appears and liberates, gives moksha, or enlightens Gajendra. And that's the lesson we all are learning while Jupiter transits to Capricorn. And we are learning to manage our external life and create enough structures. But then after we have done that, to really let go and surrender. Invoking Vishnu is really great. Saturn is also there in Capricorn, creating a Nicha Bhanga, which really means it's helping Jupiter through the misery that Jupiter probably invokes or triggers in us while it's transiting through Capricorn. So Saturn is creating a Nicha Bhanga, or helps the debilitated state of Jupiter, so that we can surrender easier. We can understand the nature of world and limitations and the nature of structure. Why do we have structures in the world? And create a healthy relationship instead of just rebelling needlessly, unnecessarily, violently against structures. Understand their place in culture and society, and respect them in our own lives too, like have routines and make sure we cook, we manage our money, we eat well, we have healthy relationships with people, we live our life with certain principles. We live a principled life. But after we have managed our external life, we really surrender into the divine. That's the lesson of Jupiter and Capricorn. And you have to remember, One of my dear friends and philosophers, Manoj Chalam, always says, if you're a carpenter, chances are after enlightenment, you will still be a carpenter. You'll be just an enlightened carpenter. Think about that. Till next time. Bye.